Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar that David from Ontwikkel will host today. My name is Marlies. I will do a slight introduction and then give the mic to David. I'm from the courseware company. I'm an account manager. The courseware company offers articulate and other solutions in the Netherlands. We also have learning management systems and learning experience platforms. We offer the articulate software, and we also offer the certified training for the different tools like RISE and Storyline 360. I will be the moderator today, so I will hand it over to David quite soon, but I will keep an eye on the chat. If people have questions, I will, for sometimes break into David's or what David is telling and ask him questions. And I can imagine that there are quite a few people in this webinar, so it's possible that there are a lot of questions. So maybe if it's not enough time, we will get back to the people who ask questions via email. Also good to mention is that this webinar will be recorded, and you will receive the recording in your email after the session. So without further ado, I will switch off my camera and give the mic to David, who's joining us from Phoenix, Arizona, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So cut him some slack because it's really early, although he's been up for quite a few hours, I heard. So
it's like the afternoon right now.
Yeah, okay. So David, over to you.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. And thank you all for inviting us. I'm really happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. I wish we could be out there again this year, but obviously not. But it's still nice to see you all. I recognized a few names in the chat, although I probably can't keep my eye on that because I'll lose my place. But yeah, so for today, just kind of an informal session on our weekly e-learning challenges. Hopefully you know about them, but we'll kind of look at those and just look at some examples. I think most of these will be I would say they're not difficult, but they are, I think for me, you know, when I go through them, a lot of them are just ideas that I never thought about that. So I have to do these every week, and I'll kind of walk you through what those look like, just a big picture of what the challenges are, and then we'll just start diving in and looking at examples. I have a RISE course presentation that I'll send out, and then you can have the links and the examples, and some of them are downloads, some of them are made available, so at least you can have those and see what we're focusing on. But specifically, I just want to kind of walk through what the challenges are. If you haven't seen them, just want to show you where you can find them, what they are, and how they work. And then we'll just dive in and look at the examples. And we did this last year. It was a lot of fun. I do the challenges, so I'm not only posting the examples, but I'm also doing the recaps, which means I've got to go through a lot of examples every week. And I think we just hit our 300th challenge last week. So that's kind of cool. 7 years doing this, and we have over 8,000 examples that people have submitted. And I've got to go through each of them as I do the recap each week. And one thing I typically try to do when I'm going through those, and it's a pretty time-consuming process, is just try to think of one thing that I like about it. Now, one thing that you'll notice with well, these are all pretty good looking examples, but a lot of the examples may not have they may not be really polished, meaning that someone just put 30 minutes into it, that, you know, not everyone spends a lot of time. And even sometimes when you see the examples that may not look like a showcase piece or something that you would think, oh, that's a good looking course, there's still something there that looks, that's an idea there that's interesting and usable. You know, it's maybe one that you already use and know. But one thing that I try to reinforce with the challenges is to look beyond what the initial impact of what the visual look of the challenge, because sometimes people are just using boxes and arrows to make an idea. And so visually it's not that engaging. But when you start diving into it, you're like, that is super, super creative. So keep that in mind. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end, just before y'all leave, just some things that you can do on your own, just if you wanted to participate. So with that, let's just dive in real quick, and I will try to keep an eye on the chat as well. So feel free. It always makes these a little bit more, I think, helpful sometimes when you know I can respond to what you're asking about. So don't hesitate to ask. I can do a decent job watching both. But let me just pull up the challenges real quick. So in our community, which is community.articulate.com, and I'll drop the link into the chat in just a moment. So from the community, we will go to e-learning, the Learn tab, and then just the e-learning challenges. So they're about midway down. And so the way these will work, and depending on how this goes, I may need to shut off my video because I'm already noticing a substantial lag. So if that happens, I'll turn off video and then we'll kind of go back and forth. I even showered today, so I was happy to be on video, but if that doesn't work. But here's the challenges. The idea is every Friday, we'll post a new one. And last Friday, we posted our 300th. And what happens during the week is users will start posting examples. So I'm going to go to a previous week just because that's where I have both the recap and the examples. So this was last week's. And the idea is, okay, well, what can you do with storylines convert to freeform, right? Pretty simple, not a you know, nothing that you didn't know about probably if you worked in Storyline for any period of time. However, it is one of the best ways to practice e-learning, meaning most times when we're working with freeform, we're going to grab one. We're going to say, here's our piece of content. This probably makes most sense as a drag and drop, or this makes most sense as a pick one. But the activity this week was take one static piece of slide and then rework it 6 times, even if it didn't make sense for the convert to freeform. So that's a really big challenge, right? So even if you know it's not the right challenge, you're forcing yourself to see different interactivity possibilities. So we'll post it, no big deal. No, rules are pretty open. People don't have to follow it too strictly. But sometimes I'll give an example of one slide reworked or something. And then what happens over the next week is, you know, 10, 20 people will start sharing their work. And then after they've gone through that for the week, some people will share examples, some people will share downloads. The following week, on a Thursday, so every Thursday, we'll come in and then add the recap post. So the recap is where we just take everyone's example and then just put it on a page, show everyone what you came up with. Now, first off, it's a great way to show your work and get some visibility, right? So you can get out there and at least have something as a portfolio piece. But it's also another way to practice things you may not always do in your normal work, right? So a lot of times when we do our course building or training, we're often doing the same types of projects because we're working for the same types of clients. So one way is just to stretch your skills. So here's what the recap looks like. If you have a personal website or any social media, we'll link to those accounts. And that's what happens week after week after week. So along the way, when I'm putting these together, I start to see things like, you know, technically most of them, you know, there's some advanced users, but a lot of them are just when you have 20, 30 people doing the same project, but on their own way, you get some really creative variations or options or variances in that. So that's what we're really going to focus on with today's example. So I highly encourage you to take a look at these if you hadn't noticed. I'd be curious if you want to use the questions panel, the chat panel. Let me know if you've ever shared one in the challenge, and I'd also like to know if there's someone who's never even heard of them. So I'd be curious about that too. All right, let's dive in. I feel like my system is really, really sluggish, and I'm going to turn off the video for a little bit. I hate to do that because I know it's a little bit more fun with it, but I can see this is not, it's not responding. So I'm going to turn off video. If it doesn't change anything, I'll bring it back up, but I feel like it's just, everything is moving slowly. So let's turn that off, and I'm going to do one thing here. Yeah, it's bringing it up. Huh. All right. I'm just changing. All right, hopefully that's still good for you. Okay, I'm gonna try it now. Sorry about that. I feel like it's just been a little bit sluggish. All right, so I'll share this course with you all after today's session, but we're just gonna go through some examples and things to look at, because one of the things that I like to encourage when folks are looking at examples is ask yourself, do you know what they did? Do you know what the designer in that example just did? If you do, then that's great, because then you can build it. But if you don't know what they did, then make an activity out of it. Take a moment and jump in there and see if you can't make a really quick, simple version of it. It doesn't have to be a fully developed, a really well-designed version. It's just technically, can you do that? So I highlighted a few of my favorites just because I think some of the examples in this challenge were some of the best. But obviously, you can go to that link I sent you, and you can jump back to the beginning and see whichever ones interest you. All right, so let's get in here and take a look at a few examples. Now, some of these, the users have shared their downloads, which is really super great. And if they did, then you can have access to that. If I did, there's a few people I did write to ask for their example. I haven't heard back. But if you have a question on that, that's a good question for the community or for your own team, or you can even send it to me and say, how did they do that? And I'll be more than happy to help with that. So first example, and I will drop the link in here because it might make it easier for all of you to also look at on your own, just depending on bandwidth. And that is this first example from Carlos. And so what I like about this example, first off, Carlos does a really great job with his graphics. But what I thought was unique, was a little different, a little bit not something that we typically see. And that is, first off, he's using the built-in markers, right? So you can recognize the built-in marker. That's pretty simple, right? That's for the interactive object and storyline. But notice as I hover over each marker, how the background element has changed colors. So what I thought was kind of neat here is typically we would see a visited state maybe on the marker, right? So if you can change states, if you didn't know that, you can open a marker and add a visited state. But because this image on the background is not a single image, a flattened image like you would typically see, each element can have a state change. So what we're doing is we're triggering a state change as we move over each marker. Is it difficult? Absolutely not. But it's just a little difference in how we typically see markers used, because this composition, this image right here, this background graphic is not a flat image. It's actually a bunch of smaller images, and that's how you can make that happen. So I thought that was kind of neat. One thing you can kind of, as you go through each of these, we'll look at some examples of just highlighted pieces, right? So the first thing is that we're having state changes for each object, right? That's pretty much, okay, just a timeout, right? Do we need a zoom on an image when the image doesn't get any bigger? I should probably have taken off my zoom effect for that one. But a state change, right? So as soon as you mouse over the marker, you can see that, and then that's what the trigger, oh goodness, what the trigger looks like, right? When the user hovers over the marker, you can change the state of another object. Obviously, you need a bunch of different objects on the slide rather than just one big image, but that's it. And exactly, Mark, right? And that they stay highlighted because it's using a visited state. So we're changing it to visited so that it remains persistent, right? Because the visited state is always persistent. And then the only little, I would say maybe, I thought an additional element that may not be known is there's a little cover screen over the background elements. Because you're working with visited states, it makes the actual objects buttons, and you don't want users clicking each of these. You don't want the users to click each object. So a hotspot or an invisible rectangle protects those objects from being clickable, and only the markers can be used. So I thought that was a good one. If you like it, great. I have a link here. Carlos did share his file, and if you like it, you can reach out to him. He does a lot of great work. And then what I would do if we were doing this in a workshop, I would say we could also talk about some other use cases. What would you do with it? But we probably don't have a lot of time for that. But what I would say is when you're looking at examples, that's a question you might ask yourself, right? Is there anything I would change in it? Well, the only thing I might change, and sometimes I don't even, it's just being picky, is that some of these colors are a little bit light and I don't always see it. Like the water changed to just a lighter blue, wasn't entirely evident. That's not a big deal. And then you can think, well, how else could I do it? If I'm working with markers, what else types of projects am I working with where it would make sense to separate the objects and make those individual? All right, this one, absolutely love this example. We're using a slider, and this is for either interactive documents or for explore type activities. Now, again, technically a slider, hopefully you use sliders. If not, that's totally cool because sliders are one of the best interactive objects out there. But in this case, the slider is being used to reveal different parts of an image. So first off, let me give you the link. Okay, let's get the link up. And it might just, again, be easier for all of you if you can use that on your own. So what I liked here is most times if you had an interactive document and you wanted to explore, right, the document, you would click in different places on the document and reveal content. In this case, we're using a slider to show and hide a layer of the content. Technically, right, as the slider moves, we're just saying show a slide layer or reveal something or change the state of something. But it's a nice way to let users explore a document in the sense that, I don't know if you've ever seen those examples where you could click and drag around the document. You get this magnifying example or like a masking example or highlighting. Yeah, Storyline doesn't have that. Okay, well, what if you need to do something like that, what can you do with that? Well, in this case, a slider is another way to navigate a document. Typically, we're thinking of tabs, right? I would think a tabbed interaction might be something that you'd see more common. So is a slider always the best option? Maybe not. But did you know a slider could be used for that? Maybe, maybe not. So that's the whole idea here, is that it's just another interactive object that gives you some ways to navigate a document. I really like this example. I'll close it out of here. So technically, and again, you can, if you want to download the file, Jody just shared it this week. Can you show a layer when a slider moves? Hopefully, that's a pretty basic use case. I had just received her file, so I was making up my own version of it. But the idea is after you make each layer, you just crop that initial image of it. You don't have to keep inserting multiple images. You just make a crop of it and then add a slight background, a slight background fade or a little background cover layer. And then for each state, right, for each layer, you're just going to show a different part of the graphic. So if you've ever used a slider, this is something you can do. For me, it's just a different way to use this for navigating the document. So I think this is really great. I think it's another way to get you use the tools and see them differently, which is, I think, the biggest part of one of the values of the challenges is what can you do that's not the same, but still appropriate, but still gives you something that you can use as a way to kind of freshen or present the content in a slightly different way. Okay, next up, and we'll take a look. I want to show this one in Storyline because I absolutely love what's going on here. And the idea here is that instead of using a traditional type click and reveal, we've actually made a dial a full slide image. So first off, you can make dials look like anything you want. Typically, dials are round or dials are they look like knobs. Okay, so real quick, I saw the question about, I understand it. What I've put up here at the top is just an animated GIF, just to kind of highlight it. Now we can embed Storyline into Rise. So if you ever, there's a Storyline block in Rise where we could embed the actual Storyline project. I thought it was easier just to publish these, use the original users example that's published. But yeah, so what we're seeing right here is just an animated GIF. But I could have added the Storyline project directly inside of the slide, and that would be totally fine. I don't have the source files for all of these users examples, so what I did was I just linked to their original work. But that's a good question. So here's how this one works. Let me give you the link. Let me give you the link, copy link, and there we go. But that's a great question because yes, you can put Storyline into Rise, and it does give you so much more interactivity, interactive possibilities. So here's what this one would look like. Let me just pull this up. Okay. And while that comes up, I will take all right, It's just taking a little bit of time here. Don't have anything else to shut down. I would like to shut things down. Maybe I'll have to come back to it. It's definitely taking a little bit more processing time than I thought. But what I wanted to show, if I can, well, there it's coming. Maybe we won't do a lot of storyline work today then, which is fine because if a lot of these you'll have the examples, and if you have a question, I can help. But I don't want to lose all of our time waiting for storyline to open. And we'll give it 1 or 2 more seconds. If not, then we'll just move on. Who did this on Dave? I don't know who did this on me. This is just how it goes. All right, so we'll try to do it real quick. I have the image here. I just want to show the general idea because it's a really, I think, a really creative way to use dials. Really, dials are usually smaller on the slide, and they're used to reveal content. But if you have an image, and I'll use the same one I just did for the test here in Media Library. The key, though, when you're doing this, and I can't emphasize this enough, is if you're using custom images for dials, is you're going to want them to be a perfect square. Otherwise, you're going to get a wobble effect. So in this case, this is just a stock photo. I believe it's similar to the one that Joanna used. But with any image that you have on your slide, you can actually convert that to an interactive dial. So with the image selected, we'll just come on up here to the Insert tab, right up here on the ribbon. And then we can over here under dial, at the very bottom, it's funny how a lot of times we miss it because it is kind of smaller, is we can convert that to its own dial, which means that you're going to get the same interactive capabilities. So if I convert it to a dial, most of it's going to look about the same. You'll see that we get the dial arc. And depending on how, if you want it to rotate 360 degrees, we can just change that up here. And then the key here is to scale this way up. So you take the image and then you just make it super big. Right? And so I would adjust the number of steps for my dial, right? There's the steps, the step value. I'm just going to leave it blank, default. But you now made the image the same size as the slide, or larger, or a little bit off the slide. And now you've got something that you can reveal. So I'm not going to go through how dials work, but the idea is each time you turn the dial, you're changing a variable. So when you change a variable, you can then do something, right? Because a dial has an associated variable with it. The variable value, if it equals 1, show me this layer. If it equals 2, show this layer, and so on. And so you can make all of that magic happen as you start to turn it. And what's nice is you don't start to see it because it doesn't feel like a dial, right? It feels like a rotating slide graphic rather than a dial, right? And so I can move these guys around, and each time I move it, a value is changing. And then because of that, I can then reveal certain elements and make something happen. So just a quick idea on how to use that. And again, if you've ever used a dial, technically this is nothing you haven't done. But to me, it was a different presentation for using dials, right? I mean, I've seen variations of it, but the idea is you don't typically see a dial that's that large, and that makes it a whole different element. And you could even put it off here on the side navigation as well. So you could have something on the side and then all the content reveals right here. That's a cool way to change up how something is navigating. So that's Joanna's example. She does really great work. And let's keep on cooking. I'm glad. Thanks for the feedback on that one. I'm glad that one resonated. And that's really it, because a lot of these maybe you're doing something similar, and then others maybe you haven't tried it. And I can't emphasize it enough, because a lot of times we say something, we dismiss things. We say, oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way. Okay, maybe you wouldn't, but have you practiced doing it that way? If you're always running, do you ever ride the bike, right? If you always ride the bike, do you ever run or hike? It's sort of cross training. It's a way to practice. Even if that's not your sport or that's not your passion, it's about just getting out there and trying something different, because it does make you stronger, right? This is a creative industry that we're in. The biggest challenge I think, the biggest skill set in our industry, other than the people who are like the programmers, but from e-learning instructional designers, the creativity part, the problem solving, that's all creative, right? If you've only seen content where the text is on the left and the image is on the right, and that's the only thing you know. But then if you go somewhere and it's like, wow, there's text on the top and image on the bottom, that's crazy. I'd like that. It's just a whole different way to build it. You didn't have to get any stronger in storyline. You just had to see something different. So speaking of seeing things different, here's the example. So what I liked about this one was, and I had to look at the source file because there's a little bit of variable and trigger action going here. So I just dropped the link in, is that it's not difficult to make a one value. Okay. I tried to cover up the right side of the screen. You would not see it, but it's easy to make one of these values change, right? That's the reference value that's associated with the variable. However, connecting those two together and then also using a slider with a masking technique is really, really neat. I love how we can create this and it's at 100% or 100%. So, where do you put your time? What does that look like? And then you can download that. So a couple things going on right here. First off, there's two sliders. And if you've never seen or played with connecting two sliders together, that's really powerful. Typically, you'll see those types of effects when you're talking about parallax, where you have a background that's moving differently than the front character. In this case, we're having a slider, which is this first one. There's a good example of where my zoom is appropriately used. Zoom got bigger. And that is, this is a slider, but then this purple graphic is also a slider. And it's just connected using the same variable. So once you do that, you can then put graphics with little punch out objects on top of them. So this was a shape with the character punched out, probably made in PowerPoint or something like that, or Photoshop. So the idea is it's a transparent graphic. So anything you put underneath it will only show where that little character is. And a lot of the examples that I wanted to include even more, but I felt like it was going to be this whole theme, is this type of technique is a little bit more work. You have to know Photoshop or you have to know PowerPoint. But the benefit is that you can create special effects that most other people are not creating. This is just a combined effects in PowerPoint. I don't know if I went so far here. I could show that too. But when you have graphics that are hidden, you can put things underneath it and then have them reveal and control only parts of the slide where they reveal. So there's a little bit of trigger action going here. So there are two variables, right? There's a building and a meeting variable, or a slider for each of those. And then you're basically subtracting a variable as you're adding to the other, right? So this, because the triggers are going to fire from top down, you have the set building value equal to 100, but then you're also subtracting it from the building value when you're moving it. But then you also have the same thing going here for the object. So nope, the changes, the percentages are all text. It's the reference variable mark. So when you add a slider or a dial or even a variable, there's associated what's called a variable reference. And what that means is it'll show you the value of the slider. So as it's moving, this number is dynamic and it's tied to the slider. So the slider is set from 0 to 100, and that's how that number is done. But those are not state changes. Those are actual text. So download the file, take a look at it. Once you have the template, you can change the character to a chart or a bar graph, and it could go up and down rather than side to side. And that even sometimes is just another way that you could practice looking at them. Is just rework someone's file. A lot of times in the challenges, someone will we don't do a lot of advanced ones, but occasionally we do. And sometimes it's beyond what someone's comfortable working with. So they'll take the person's file or an example, and then they would simply rework it, maybe change the graphics or do something slightly different just to get practice doing it, but knowing that maybe the triggers and the variables are a little bit outside of their skill set. So that's how you could do it. All right, I just recognized that Trey, I know Trey, so hello, Trey. All right, let's keep looking and going through a few more. This is a example from Jonathan. So let me pull this one up real quick. So I'll give you the link right here. This is a little bigger file. Oh no, I got the link. Just a second. I have to go hunt down that link because when I copied and pasted it, it seemingly only copied part of the link. That's all right. I always have backups. There you go. There's the link. And now I have to do this myself manually. All right. Lots going on here. I only chose to focus on a couple things with it because we could easily have done a lot of different ones. But what I liked, what I'm looking at here in this example is the subtle background animations, the little looping graphics as a way to create ongoing movement. So this might present better for you. Maybe it's okay. But notice how the cars has this looping effect where it's just waiting. I love the waiting looping. And you could think about where this could be used as maybe a character tapping their foot as they wait for you to make a decision. And then, of course, you have the animated background going on with that. And it's waiting for each of these decisions to be made. I think it's Rolling Stone. But then you've got the looping effect as it goes through each of the road. So we've done a few challenges around looping backgrounds and subtle, what they call cinematograph type techniques, where the background is just ongoing, but it's not the focal point. And I like that because why? First off, slides typically, we'll close out of here. Slides are typically two-dimensional, right? And so they aren't really that deep. They don't have a lot of depth or texture or especially movement unless things are sliding on as an entrance animation or like a build, like a build and hold type where things are progressively building. But to have something progressive, a continuously loop or movement as a slow background effect is a fantastic way to add some depth to your course. Another example of something like this might just be two characters standing and then slowly moving back and forth like they're listening to each other, right? So you maybe have 5 or 6 poses for the character, kind of like what he's showing right here, but they're not really gesturing really big, right? The arms aren't going all over. They're not flailing around, but they are interacting with each other or they're in this waiting pose. Kind of like if you're standing in line at the bank, you know, there's a little bit of movement. You're not perfectly still like a board. And that's a really nice technique for adding some additional movement. And once you have that set up, you can kind of duplicate it and then replace the state changes with each of the characters. So another thing to consider, the animated GIF and educational animations challenge is where you'll find most of these examples. I highlighted those in the initial piece with the initial examples, but highly encourage you to take a look at using some things like that with just subtle movements. Now, in this one, it's kind of an extreme example. I probably could have found another one where we, Jonathan Hill did this one. I'll copy his name. Hopefully I got the link right for his name. I think that's it. Hopefully that gives you the right Jonathan Hill. And there's a lot more going on in here. There's a lot of like 5 or 6 different techniques, but I really wanted to focus just on that piece of animation as a way to look at it. And if you haven't seen Storyline's jump to time trigger or jump to frame or jump to cue point trigger or time, you could actually create this a little bit easier now because you can have the timeline or pieces of the timeline repeat when the timeline reaches a certain point. So you can create that ongoing looping animation. All right. Nice little special effect in this one. And what I'll do is pull it up. I didn't get the file, so I should have taken that link off. So let's see here, drop this link in here. This one's from Joseph. I think we featured one from Joseph last year. If you saw us when we were out there in person, there it is. And again, the whole point of people participating in the challenges, even if you're not sharing your work, but you're just watching, it's kind of like going to e-learning school each week, meaning, excuse me, just looking at examples can help you become better, right? You don't have to learn a whole new skill. So the whole challenge on this week, this particular challenge was just using a scrolling panel. Scrolling panel is a great interactive object in Storyline. You've got a lot of text on your slide. Can you condense that text and make it fit? Sure you can, but we don't typically see them used as ways to contain images, or in this case, we're using it to create this masking guide effect that we're showing for, in this case, a map, like showing a route. So if you're thinking about this, and if you've not seen this example, where do you think this little animation, this little object right here is coming from? How's that being animated? Obviously, it's in line with the scrolling panel. Excuse me. Obviously, it's connected somehow, and then you've got these objects right here that are being revealed as we drag down the scrolling panel. So we take a look at it, and we just start going through it. Why is it unique? What's interesting? And we find that it's all based on a little trickery. Well, not really trickery, masking. So again, we have an image with a cutout. So this white right here is cut out, very similar to what we just saw with the combining sliders. So if I scroll down here real quick, this graphic right here, it's cut out. Oh, it's a white background for Joseph's example, but there's that trail has been cut out of the background, and with that means that you can simulate that effect of something moving below it. So you've got some objects below the map, some objects below on top of the map. With scrolling panels, you can add images to them. It doesn't have to be text. It doesn't just have to be text, or it could be a combination of text. You could use text and graphics, text and images, buttons, even interactive buttons will work just fine in there. And so with that, you can control the movement of it, right? And so you can see how, when we're animating this, how that would look. So that orange shape would actually be below the map, right? So that's how you can show it. And then these yellow shapes over here would be white that's covering up the background. This is absolutely brilliant, right? So super simple, scrolling panel, nothing to it. You drop one on the slide and you put objects inside of it. We've used it. If you've used Storyline, hopefully for a while, you've used that. But here's another example of something just being used in a different way. So I just thought that really caught my attention with it, and something that you could look at using. So I do like the feedback. I'm just checking the questions on that one. Cool. And this is exactly why, if nothing else, just jumping into each week and looking at what people show. Just look at the examples that people come up with, like the countdown timers, right? Perfect example of creative ways that you're using ways to show time. Maybe I should be careful in pulling this up. There we go. But if you've ever worked with the wipe animation, right? You can have, or a reveal. This is the swirl. I'm sorry. Which one is that? The wheel. The wheel can be used to reveal, that rhymes, an object underneath it. So now you're creating some kind of timer or some type of a reveal activity, right? Using the wipe across the slide, you can have objects that look like the content. You don't have to have it just be a bar graph. So in this case, these are just animations that are exported probably from PowerPoint or in Storyline, and you are using the animation movement across the slide and the wipe effect to create that trailing effect right below it. It's super simple. But what happens is what? We're going to get, I don't even know, I'm going to say 41 different ways to use timers in your course. You're not going to use them all maybe, but the whole point is that you now have ideas. This one right here, I'm just going to drop the link in. I didn't feature it. It was one on my list to feature, but I just didn't include it. But check out the Lego timer. The Lego bricks she manually adds as a way to create a timer across the slide while you're doing scenarios. Come on, that's brilliant. So anyway, this is what makes all of us a little bit better at what we do, and helps us discover new ideas or new things that we can use in our own projects. So just keep that in mind. There's another one from Jonathan. You can download his file there. Jody's always really great about sharing her work as well too. So just another reason why, if nothing else, even if you're not jumping into the challenges, just look at the examples, see what folks are doing. I mean, it's amazing. And it's a lot of times it's just a simple play on something you already do, but it's just reframed. I think about that a lot of times with writing, because you think about what makes a good writer, right? You write a certain way, and then you see someone else take the same words and then they kind of mix them up a little. They just reword them or reorganize them, and you think that's a better way of saying that. Not that you didn't know the words, you had the same vocabulary, but just seeing the different way that the words can be used. Same thing with e-learning, right? It's a lot of it's presentation. How do we present these objects and text and graphics together? And then what's that story we're telling? And then how can we just rework some of those to create something different? Can't do a challenge without featuring Andre. He is timers for the total course. So not so easy unless you're doing some kind of JavaScript there, Henny. We don't have a full timer like you are asking. It's usually on the slide basis or built for the quizzes. So you would need something a little external for that. And maybe the LMS feature could also tie into that, but that's a good question. It's just not something that's built in directly into Storyline. So a couple things going on in this one. Let me give you the link for it. I think I'm focusing on the graphics more on this one, but it's also a great use of motion paths because the motion paths are using, there's 2 motion paths for every object, the entrance and the exit, not an entrance animation, but the fly in or the come in and then the go out. This was all done in Photoshop. You can do something comparable in PowerPoint, but it's this level of shadows, these inner shadows that you get with the graphics, a lot more control in a graphics program, but it's basically a tabs interaction. Right? You click one of these and you reveal something, right? Click it again, everything comes back. Click these 2, something else comes in. So essentially, it's a click and reveal. But what makes this so unique is this layered, right? First off, we've got some great texture on it. And then we've also got all these different background layers with different cutout effects, each with its own inner or drop shadow, which creates that whole stacking effect. It feels like you could kind of reach your hand into this project and go grab each of these objects. So just a really playful example, whether or not you're using the paper cutout type effect, the idea of layering something and creating something similar to what we also saw with the, oh, I just forgot. What was the one we looked at with the layering? I guess with the sliders, oh, maybe we haven't looked at it yet. Sorry, that's why. I'm thinking about the bear example. But when you're layering the graphics, you're creating something that you don't typically get to see, and that is the depth. So it just makes you want to reach out and touch this, play with it, go in and out with it. And so I thought that was neat. I do have a couple examples of he has a video tutorial on where he's walking through it. I found a little bit easier to use this in Photoshop when I created my own version of it. But you can do it in PowerPoint, and you can even do some of it in Storyline because you do have a drop shadow, but you do need PowerPoint to create that punch out effect. So you need a way to create that hole in the background graphic, right? So each of these, this white one, the light blue, the dark blue, and then the black, the really dark blue, each of those is its own background, and that's had a punch out. You've cut that hole in it like we did that icon for the sliders. And then you just add the different layers of drop shadow, and then they're brought into Storyline where you can then layer graphics. And then each object would, of course, have its own motion path. Now, if you've never worked with motion paths in Storyline, we made some changes, maybe Storyline 360 or a little bit earlier, where, yeah, it was with 360, where we renamed the motion paths, but we've actually really improved on even how the guides align with the motion path, which means something like this is so much easier today than if you tried it maybe in Storyline 2, because each motion paths guide will line up exactly where you want it. You'll even see it snap and color code as you get that smart guide aligned. So if you haven't tried working with something this where things go in and out based on triggers, it's much, much easier right now. So here's a very interesting one. I thought technically it's not difficult, but what is totally just, I don't know if you followed the thread on LinkedIn. I probably should have gotten the link for you. It's a card trick, and he's using this as a way to teach unconscious bias. Let me pop the link in right there. So here's what happens, and I thought this was just a brilliant use of recreating a classroom or real world activity, and then doing something, making that work and translating that to e-learning. So we'll do this. We'll do the game together. I think like everything's moving fast enough to look at it. So we are going to have to pick a card. So this someone, I forgot who asked earlier, this is storyline embedded directly into Rise. So let's just go through the card game real quick. So we'll say click here when you're ready to begin. And now we need to choose a card. Ah, I gave you the wrong link. All right. Sorry. Thanks, Patricia. There you go. All right. Do you remember which card you picked? You remember the card you picked, and then we select it. It's going to be removed, and then we click continue, and then we're going to see all the cards. But as we reveal them, we're going to find out that the card we picked isn't there. Now, how did that work? Oh my goodness. What happened? So you'll have to view his post to figure out how he knew which card you picked and removed it. And I have that link up top in the course. And you could even download the storyline files. But, oh, so you know the trick, right? It got me. And if you watch the thread that's going on LinkedIn, you'll see that it's getting a lot of other people too. And so technically it's storyline, you know, with some simple animation, not even any trigger, variables or anything, but it's a real world activity, classroom activity, real world activity game that's been translated into e-learning, and it's just as effective. People are just as surprised on how this works. And it's a really great example, I think, of how which is what his whole purpose was his unbiased, unconscious bias about how you think you see something and then you really didn't. So I'll make sure the link is in the page so you can go back and take a look at how that works. But just a great example of trying something that you've already done in the real world and then bringing that excuse me, into your e-learning course. And not a lot of times, like in this example, it's not as difficult as you may think. So yeah, there's the problem right there. Okay, so what's happening here? I guess I do have the answer right here in what's happening. So the whole idea, if you see this, is he's never showing you the original cards. So that's the whole point, is that you think you saw it, you think you remembered it, but you actually never did, which is why. Yeah, you know, it's funny, Sonny, I always feel like I've seen enough of these that I should be able to figure it out. Like I always feel like, okay, yes, I've seen enough of these. Like my kid, my 12-year-old is always doing magic for me or jokes, like little riddles. But I've seen them. I'm old. I've seen a million of them. And so a lot of times you can kind of figure them out, but not all the time. And this one totally got me on that. All right, last one, and then we'll wrap it up, which is surprisingly, we're doing so well on time, but I did want to go more into storyline for that. Maybe you've seen this example. Most times we're focusing on a couple of different things like the 3D objects. What I really liked, again, was the layering. So the whole thing we just saw with Andre's example with the space example. Notice how this right here, the rock is a separate cutout graphic from the background. So using just a simple motion path with a different duration and speed, we can create that reveal effect. So this could be maybe a shoplifter or a customer having a problem, you know, in the back. But I like how it creates a sense of opening that you otherwise would just see as a static, like the bear would just slide onto the slide, right? That would be a typical entrance animation for that. What's also in this course, I didn't give you the link, sorry, copy link, is the use of the 3D objects, meaning, I don't have it right here, but if I pull open the project, there's a great use of PowerPoint's 3D models and morph objects. So I would show, there's a lot to go in here. Let's see how fast we can pull some of this up. For me, the thing I was really focused on was I liked the use of the parallax, like the layered opening of the scenes. I used to really be big into that when I used to work in Flash all the time. So what do you do? If you see a big bear, do you take a picture and then he comes at you? Let me say run. Probably not a good idea either. So the bear part was a 3D models. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to run. It's going to get you. So notice how the bears, right, they're rotating and really in real time. So this is an option in PowerPoint. If you haven't seen it, you can, let Let me see if I can pull this open super quick. There we go. So in PowerPoint, you have, you need the online version, the PowerPoint 365. If you have that, then you have two things that will work. You have the 3D models, and then more importantly, you get the morph, the morph transition. So the idea is, let's get rid of both of these. My little shadow. Insert a 3D model, right? So you have those in PowerPoint, and they have a pretty large collection of them. And once you grab one, obviously the model is going to have a fully developed model where you can then rotate it and make things happen. But there's like a 2 steps here where it's really simple to make that happen, and then export them as videos for Storyline. So first you want to get that into Storyline or into PowerPoint, which is where we're working here. We can't recognize the models in Storyline, unfortunately, but we can export them. Mark, if you're still seeing the card example, you might want to refresh the browser. I'm looking at the preview, and we're in PowerPoint right now, but you shouldn't still be seeing the card example. I don't think I've hit, yeah, I'm still sharing my screen. So once we have the object, you just need to duplicate the slide, right? So if I just come in here and then duplicate the slide, and on the second slide is where we want to rotate the object. And then maybe we scale it up, and I'm obviously going pretty quick. All right. That's fine. There we go. And so the way this works, I can't transition from one slide to the next to make it happen, but I do, if I on the second slide, if I come up to the transitions tab and use the morph, what'll happen is it'll take the preview from the first slide and then make that automatically rotate for me. And then we export this as a video to bring into Storyline. So the idea is if we're working with a lot of these different models, like she's working with the bears, you just need different videos, and then you're going to trigger each of those videos to play. So add your graphic. It is one of PowerPoint's most powerful features. It'd be nice if, you know, at some point they can start to add, you can add your own models if you have that kind of skill, and then you bring it in, and then the whole magic happens when you export it as a video, right? And then you bring that video directly into Storyline, and then you just trigger the video like you would any other objects, right? There's a create a video file, and then in Storyline, bring those videos in, and maybe you're jumping to different slides or showing layers because you have so many versions of it. But again, another way to wow, I think, your customer, because they're not used to seeing it, and it just gives it a whole different perspective. In this case, maybe the object is the focal point, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's something in the background, like an office chair that just rotates, or a desk that rotates around, and that's what happens there, right? So then with the button, we can just trigger and play a video. So the idea is you're going to have multiple buttons to show multiple videos based on whatever you're trying to make happen. So I know we're almost at the top of the hour. I don't want to do one for, that's right. They're going to have, as soon as you show them one model, they're going to want a different one for their customer plan. But a lot here, right? And a lot to think about, a lot of different ways to look at them. Biggest thing I would say is if any of these inspired you, you know, if nothing else, jump into one of the comments and then just give some feedback on someone. And if you are up for it, considering sharing something. You don't have to share in the current challenge, even though those are going to be the ones that get the most excitement because they're the ones that are current. But you could jump back into anyone, look for the challenge list, and go back as far as, I think, 2013 now, and jump into any of the older ones. So we'll still add your examples, but you know, if you want to do it without a lot of attention and having too many people see it, you could go back in there and use an older one, or you could always just go on one of the ones on the front page, which are probably the 20 most active for the, you know, at that point in time. But we'll still add you, we'll still feature your work, and it doesn't have to be something that's overly polished. Some people spend 30 minutes. They just say, I'm just giving myself 30 minutes. I'm not going to spend any more time. And their examples look really basic. Other people like Jonathan and Jody and Mons and Others may spend up to 10 hours on a project, but it's just what you're doing and where you are with it. One thing I know, I'll say this, and then I'll turn it back, is you could even do this internally with your own team. You don't have to do it and share it and articulate challenges. You could say, we'll take one of these, and on Fridays we're gonna do this as a team. We're not gonna share it, but we'll just do it internally with us, and then we'll go through what that looks like, or do the deconstruction. Open up an example, right? Buttons. But how do you use buttons? This was a good one. It's controversial because anything with the next button is going to cause some controversy. But you could say, what is one thing I liked in that example? And see what you guys, see what people come up with on your own team. You don't have to share it, right? I mean, if you want to share it, that's great. But you could go through each of these and then say, well, here's what I liked. Here's what I didn't like. Or can I do that? Do I know how to build that? If I do, great. If I don't, then let's spend 10 minutes and try and see what we can do with that. Okay, well, that's it for me. I didn't see too many more questions come in, but I would be more than happy to take any now, or you can always follow up with me after the session.
Okay, I will break in a little bit if then people have some time to ask questions maybe. But I want to thank you, David, for your time and for your inspirational presentation, your webinar. Unfortunately, the screen was a bit blurry at times, I guess. But I hope for the future webinars we can look at a solution for that. But your story was so inspiring that the blurry screen wasn't a huge problem, I guess.
Well, and I'll give you you'll have the presentation, so at least you'll have the examples in HD quality rather than internet quality or the webinar quality, I guess.
Yeah, we will email it together with the recording and with the evaluation, so everyone can have a look at it later on.
Cool. Good.
I think there are no questions anymore, only a lot of thank you notes. So again, a big thank you from the Courseware company for your time and for your presentation, and everyone who joined, thank you for your attendance. We have 6 more webinars coming up. Next week, David's colleague Tom will be up next, so please subscribe. And we hope to see you next week.
Yeah, I think I'll even join that one.
Great. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. And thanks for all the nice comments, everyone. And I if it was blurry, I apologize, but you at least have the better version of it. And you always reach out to me or the people who built those files as a way to kind of get some more information on those. So I do appreciate it and always enjoy working with you guys at the Courseware company. So thank you.
Have a nice day, all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.